Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I stand to offer my contribution to the Budget 2022, I wish to respond to the speaker who spoke before me, none other than Honorable Minister of Agriculture. The Minister of Agriculture is a disappointment, Mr. Speaker. He is the Minister of Agriculture responsible for the sugar industry. Sugar that has received a whopping $6 billion of this budget, and he barely had anything of substance to say on this industry. Instead, Mr. Speaker, he resorted to insults. Instead of outlining a proper plan for the $6 billion they are asking this House to approve. Mr. Speaker, the truth is that they have no plan. They are simply stringing along our brothers and sisters in the sugar industry and keeping them tied to an industry that they have admitted is all but dead. Mr. Speaker, I would like to also ask the Minister of Agriculture what has happened to the production of onion, potatoes, and spices, example, turmeric in Region 1. Has they abandoned that project? I didn't hear any plans that they have to talk about those productions. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I would ask the Honorable Minister to visit Enterprise, and he will see how feasible that dog food is selling. So please do not insult the Guyanese brothers and sisters who are selling dog food for a living in this country. Mr. Speaker, the budget presented under the theme steadfast against all challenges, resolute in building one Guyana. It would be remiss of me not to bring to your attention some of the disparaging and derogatory remarks made on my female colleagues on this side of the House by the Honorable Member Joseph Hamilton. Although I am not comfortable in echoing or repeating the words uttered, referring to our female parliamentarians as headless. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will repeat that although I am not comfortable in repeating or echoing the words uttered by Honorable Member Mr. Joseph Hamilton, referring to our young parliamentarians as headless, flattering Creole fowls is totally unacceptable. Mr. Speaker, it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way, Mr. Speaker. I wish to remind the honorable members that this is the highest forum in this land where we ought to encourage and empower our women parliamentarians to become the very best version of themselves amidst the unique challenges that they are facing. What message are we sending to our young women, especially when we throw remarks at a young, aspiring, indigenous woman with more than one subject CXC, 1600, Mr. Speaker, who I have no doubt can be the next Minister of Finance, and a prudent one too. The indigenous youth are listening and watching. The world is watching too. Let me therefore, Mr. Speaker, introduce to this House the fearless, feminine, and fabulous women on this side of the House. With that said, Mr. Speaker, allow me now to focus on the biggest and the worst budget of the 3 budgets ever presented by the PPPC administration. Development is a long-term progress, not a short-term process. Mr. Speaker, the government has embarked on spending an addition of 167 billion Guyana dollars than last year. And whilst the senior minister in the office of the president with responsibility for finance has announced measures here and there in the budget, it lacks clear purpose, it lacks clear priorities, and is absolutely not people-centered. I say this, Mr. Speaker, because the ordinary citizens of this country are still asking what is there for us in this budget, the biggest budget ever. The working class was eagerly waiting for the announcement of increase in their wages. The pensioners, Mr. Speaker, were glued to their radios and televisions to hear if there was anything like a cost of living allowance for them or a relief allowance. And you know why, Mr. Speaker? It was taunted not only as the biggest budget ever, but the best because of the inclusion of our oil revenues in this budget. Mr. Speaker, budget time is not about standing up for more than 5 hours, reading a 99-page booklet. Budget should be about the transformation of lives of the citizens against all challenges. And like the theme rightly says, building one Guyana. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the Guyanese populace expects the government of the day sitting in the epicenter of unprecedented change and challenges to provide a guiding hand and steer a course that continues to bring prosperity in the midst of uncertainty. Mr. Speaker, crafting a budget should take into consideration the data it receives after reviewing and analyzing the previous budgets. They can then use it to their advantage to prepare a more people-centered budget. We must be cognizant, Mr. Speaker, of the fact that plans change as delivery proceeds. Hence, the government will have to shift the way they think about budgets. Like plans, budget will change as implementation unfolds. I am therefore recommending to the minister to further increase the personal monthly income tax threshold, Mr. Speaker, to at least 120,000 as against the proposed figure of 75,000. Mr. Speaker, it is clearly understood that in any communication aimed at winning the hearts and minds for transformation, action speaks louder than words. I therefore have no doubt that the goodly minister will consider this recommendation, which will put more disposable income into the pockets of our taxpayers. Hinterland development, Mr. Speaker. You will agree with me that education is a great equalizer. And it is the key to reversing hinterland underdevelopment and provide employment, especially for our Indigenous youth and all the youths that are living in the hinterland regions. It will unlock opportunities, Mr. Speaker, for all and help to provide skills for development. Hinterland students have demonstrated that once given the equal opportunities, that is equal educational opportunities, they are capable of the best performances as anyone else in this country. Hence, Mr. Speaker, I am calling on the Minister of Education to ensure that this budget caters for a secondary school, a new secondary school to be built at Chawala or Camarang to benefit the students in the upper Mazaruni. Mr. Speaker, the Lone Desiree Caesar Fox Secondary School is now overcrowded and is unable to accommodate the new intake of grade 7 students and teachers, especially during this pandemic, Mr. Speaker. More so as we welcome the drop in the student to teacher ratio to not more than 15:1 at the nursery level and 20:1 at the primary and secondary levels, we will definitely have to create more safe spaces for the implementation of this measure. To be safe and feel safe are two terms that goes hand in hand when looking at the safety of our children and teachers. Many of our schools in the hinterland, Mr. Speaker, are still far from being described as safe due to the absence of access to potable water, functioning sanitary blocks, well-equipped sick bays, and inadequate furniture, just to name a few. Mr. Speaker, I will also echo the sentiments of my colleague, Honorable Member Ronald Cox, in asking the Minister of Education to provide modes of transportation to our students and teachers in the hinterland who have to travel distances by air, land, and water to attend school. Bring back the David G. buses. Bring back the David G. boats. And include ATVs and the four-door pickups and extend the removal of 10% excise tax on these vehicles, not only to the business persons, Mr. Speaker, but to our hinterland teachers, nurses, doctors, and all other public servants who reside and serve in these remote areas of this country. You can rename them BG boats. You can rename them BG buses or BG pickups. We must provide transportation for our children and teachers nationwide. It is also expected, Mr. Speaker, of this administration to provide access to internet services to all our hinterland schools so that they can be on par with their counterparts on the coast and around the region. Providing the students and teachers with downloaded tablets and laptops or flash drives will not have a real impact if there is no source of adequate electricity and internet services. It is time, Mr. Speaker, that all our learning institutions in the hinterland and coastland be powered with solar systems. Mr. Speaker, ethics, transparency, and accountability are the three basic attributes of public life. And so, Mr. Speaker, when we on the side of this House oppose and criticize the measures of the budget, it should not be seen as a recalcitrant opposition or sullen hostility, an expression of pseudological reasons. We are merely doing what we are mandated to do as representatives of our constituents. I nor anyone in this House is here on his or her merits, her own merits. We all are elected representatives and must be accountable to our population. Hence, Mr. Speaker, we will oppose, not just for the sake of opposing, but we are here to oppose, expose any form of corruption or discrimination if there is any. And eventually, Mr. Speaker, the people of this country will have no other choice but to dispose of any government that do not have their needs and interests at heart. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we cannot continue to treat the representatives of the 49% of the population as zero. Where is the one Guyana that we're talking about? Where is the one Guyana that we are talking about, Mr. Speaker? Where is the inclusivity of all the stakeholders of our national development? The PPPC must never again fool themselves that only them can plan by themselves and exempt the opposition and expect the Guyanese to wholly and solely accept the budget as presented. Never again, Mr. Speaker. I also concur with my colleagues to increase the stipends of the community service officers and the two-show to at least the minimum wage of 60,000. The first people of this country must be treated with dignity and respect. And I would urge the ministers of Indigenous Peoples Affairs, Health, and Education to look seriously into the welfare of our children in the hinterland. As it relates to their health, their education, their social welfare, Mr. Speaker, it bleeds my heart to have learned about the child in the Rupununi who lost his life to a snake bite after trying to get medical attention at more than 2 health centers. Mr. Speaker, is this how we care for our children? And then to add insult to the damage already done, Mr. Speaker, the parent who had to fetch the dead body of his child to the burial site after waiting for hours at the Mabaruma Hospital. Mr. Speaker, where are we heading in this country? I ask the question, are we better off in the last 18 months than we were 5 years ago? Certainly not. The answer, Mr. Speaker, at least from the indigenous population, will be a resounding no. Mr. Speaker, even as we welcome the wells completed in Jawala and Camarang in Region 7 and many others that the Minister responsibility for finance mentioned in his speech, the people of Waramuri is asking me to remind the Minister of Housing and Water to remind him about the multi-million-dollar water project that he promised them in the last year's budget. Mr. Speaker, my Honorable Minister, Mr. Crowell, please ensure that the people of Warramuri is served with potable water as anybody else, as any other Guyanese in this country. Mr. Speaker, I continue to hear about the community service officers that we fired when we came into power. Mr. Speaker, I must repeat that it was the PPPC's intention not to continue that program. It was their intention not to continue the cash grant also of $10,000 to our children in the hinterland. However, Mr. Speaker, we are happy that the CSOs are once again being attached to several entities in the hinterland. My concern, however, Mr. Speaker, where is the aspect of training these young people? The HASTE program, which we had brought under the APNU AFC, had a sector for training, and additional to the 30,000 grant that they were given, they were also given a cash grant to assist them in starting up their businesses of additional $50,000. Mr. Speaker, the people of the hinterland will be very, very grateful, the youth population, if they are included in the training of the oil and gas industry. I will await the Minister of Indian Affairs presentation and to hear what percentage or how many of our young people in the hinterland will be included in the aspect of training for the oil and industry. And not only oil and industry, Mr. Speaker, but in many other areas. Heavy duty machine operators, welding, and so, Mr. Speaker, I continue to hear, what did you do? Do not live in the past. You are in the driving seat, and you should use the past experiences, learn, and move this country forward. Forward ever, backwards never. Mr. Speaker, and I must remind this House that the community service officers who were employed, if you call that employment, because, and Mrs. Pearson also noticed that they're grateful for the 30,000. Of course they will be grateful, Mrs. Speaker, because they have no other choice. They will be grateful for the 30,000, and that is why I am asking this House to increase the stipend from 30,000 to at least the minimum wage of 60,000. That, Mr. Speaker, will be of great relief. And especially so, Mr. Speaker, these young people are not being paid monthly. They receive the stipend every 3 months. Every 3 months, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I cannot, Mr. Speaker, I will not go down the road to answer the honorable member as if I should not be the owner of a guest house or a hotel, because I do not have a hotel at Cameron. But Mr. Speaker, and that is what the young people, the indigenous youth of this people always comment about. Is it because you're indigenous that you cannot own a hotel, you cannot own a farm, you cannot own anything in this country? The people themselves will judge. The court of the people is the people that put government up, and they can also bring the government down. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I therefore must say, Mr. Speaker, that this budget in its present form is not people-oriented, it is not people-centered, and unless we listen to the population of this country and include their priorities, include their needs and interests in this 2022 budget that they are expecting to benefit from because of the inclusion of the oil revenues. I, as a representative of them, will not approve the budget in its present form. The process, Mr. Speaker, of debating the budget, of scrutinizing the budget, and approving the budget will be a waste of time if the needs of the people are not included. So, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your attention.